Okay, so we are now going to start discussing about the next stage of the audit, which is called the performance stage of the audit. Now, what exactly do you mean by performance stage of the audit? So remember one thing, the initial phase of the audit is the planning stage, and the most important output at the planning stage is that you have actually identified the risk of material mistake. Now, the risk of material misstatement is basically that the financial statement will be materially misstated, which could be either non-compliance of accounting framework, or which could either be non-validity of the assertion. So that's how the misstatement is. Now let's try to understand. What actually happens is, once you have identified the risk, so the next step is the performance stage of the audit. And what happens at the performance stage is, we try to gather the audit evidence. And either 500 requires us to gather sufficient and appropriate audit evidence. Gather sufficient and appropriate audit evidence. Now, if I talk about gathering sufficient and appropriate audit evidence, so what do we mean by this? How do we gather sufficient and appropriate audit evidence? So if I talk about the sufficient audit evidence, so sufficiency is about the quantity. So how do we establish that what is the quantity of the evidence that we need to gather? So just remember that the audit is always performed on a test basis. And whenever you draw the sample, so the sample size should reflect entire population. The sample size should reflect the entire population. So if you have to perform an audit and if you have to gather sufficient and appropriate audit evidence, so sufficiency of the evidence would means the quantity. The quantity is about ensuring that whatever the sample size that you select, it should be representative of the entire population. So you would follow the statistical sampling techniques in order to draw the samples. And similarly, the quantity, it should be representative. Number 2, it should be an appropriate audit evidence. What do we mean by appropriate audit evidence? So when we talk about the appropriate audit evidence, so it means relevant and reliable. It means relevant and reliable. Now, what do we mean by relevant and reliable? So reliability is basically about the quality of the evidence. And the relevant is basically satisfies relevant assertions. Now, what do we mean by this? For example, you are trying to verify the cost of asset. So what is going to be the relevant audit evidence for this? It's most probably going to be the purchase invoice. It's most probably going to be the purchase invoice, which is going to be the most relevant evidence to establish the cost. Now, if you inspect the assets and you try to assess the cost of the asset, then that's going to be a vague procedure. I'm repeating it again. If you try to inspect the asset and if you try to establish the cost of the asset by just inspecting the asset, so that's a vague procedure. And when it's a vague procedure, so it's not going to lead to a relevant evidence. The inspection of the asset would confirm its existence. It would not give you an idea of the value of the asset. So when we talk about the relevance actually means that when we talk about the relevance, so the relevance would be that the evidence is satisfying the relevant assertion. An inspection report of the asset would not justify the asset value. And then it's about reliability. So reliability is about quality. So when you gather the audit evidence, there are certain factors that need to be considered in order to ensure that the quality of the evidence is maintained. And what are those factors? Is that the evidence is reliable when it is externally confirmed, when it is auditor generated. So the evidence is reliable when it's externally confirmed, when it's auditor generated, when a strong internal control environment is there, and it could be externally confirmed, auditor generated, strong internal control, and then what happens is original documents. So if you come across these, and then external, if you come across an evidence which meets these criteria, then that's a quality evidence, then that's a reliable evidence. Otherwise the evidence isn't that reliable. So auditor's responsibility is to gather sufficient and appropriate audit evidence such that he can draw a conclusion on the audit. So basically at the performance stage of the audit, what happens is, at the performance stage of the audit, what happens is that the auditor tries to gather sufficient and appropriate audit evidence. Now how? So auditor, what he does is that he performs the test of control, which is called the TOCs. And if he believes that the test of control, the result of test of control indicates that there is a strong and effective controls prevalent, then he would ensure that his substantive testing goes down. Otherwise, he has to enhance his substantive testing. The substantive testing needs to be done in either way, but it's just that if you can rely more on the controls and if you can get more evidence from the test of controls, then that's a cheaper task as compared to substantive testing. That's an easier task as compared to substantive testing. Anyways, so basically what happens is, what we have done up till now is, we have discussed about the performance stage where the auditor gathers sufficient and appropriate audit evidence such that he is able to express an opinion. So anyways, what we'll do is that we'll just keep it till here and we'll continue further in our next class.